Good evening, guys. Tonight we're going over Earth's moon. So these notes are pretty short, so just make sure you're filling in your closed notes, you're filling the blank notes as we go. So we're looking at the moon tonight and just getting some basic facts down about it. We're going to talk about the phases of the moon in a couple of days. The temperature range on the moon is huge. It goes from 100 degrees Celsius to negative 170 degrees Celsius. So to put it in perspective, 0 degrees Celsius is freezing, 100 degrees Celsius is the boiling point. Now, the reason you have such huge temperature swings is because the moon has no atmosphere. So whatever heat that it gets from the sun during the day, which it also doesn't have the atmosphere to block out some of that heat like Earth does, so it gets really, really hot, the boiling point, 100 degrees Celsius, and then as it goes into shadow, all that heat that it got immediately goes away and floats back into space. So it drops when you go from sunlight to shadow to approximately negative 170 degrees. Now, as astronauts go into space, obviously there's no air and there's pressure problems, and so they have to have a spacesuit to protect themselves. Those spacesuits weigh 200 pounds on Earth, but when you get into the moon, it's got only 1/6 the gravity of Earth, so that same spacesuit that was 200 pounds on Earth becomes only 33 pounds. So that's how the astronauts were able to walk on the moon and actually move around, where obviously if they had those spacesuits on here on Earth, it was really difficult for them. Alright, so just real quick, spacesuit design. I'm not going to be quizzing you over this, but just so you know, you have your visor that protects you from the ultraviolet radiation that comes from the sun and obviously the bright lights. There's no atmosphere, so it's also very, very clear with the light coming at you. So you have to wear the visors with kind of like sunglasses to protect you from the bright light from the sun. Now, everything else is just basically made for you to survive. So you have pressure controls, you have your life support systems, cooling and heating if you need it, the boots, you have gloves for handling all of the different instruments and things. But the entire suit is completely sealed, obviously, because if it wasn't, then all the air would escape and the astronauts wouldn't be able to survive. Okay, so structure and origin of the moon. Where did it come from? There are a couple of different theories that are out there, but the one that is most believed and has the most evidence for it is called the collision theory. So what that means is that an object, approximately we think the size of Mars, at some point collided with Earth, and as it did, obviously, it was a big impact and it broke off some of Earth's material. And that material kind of started floating around the Earth and eventually came together to form the moon. Now, as far as the size goes, it is less than the distance across the United States, and it's 3,476 kilometers in diameter. It's so small that when the astronauts were walking around on the moon, you could actually see the curvature of the moon. So here's a diagram of the collision theory. So here is the object striking Earth. As it struck Earth and knocked off this material right here, that material started orbiting around Earth and eventually gravity pulled it together into the sphere shape which formed our moon. Obviously nobody was around when this happened, so this is just a computer animation and they're just going with facts that they know. Moon rocks that have been brought back from the different NASA missions matched up with materials that were found on Earth. Very similar rocks on the moon than to Earth. So it says that at some point that material must have come from the Earth. Alright, moon features. Craters. This is where all the different asteroids and pieces and debris that are flying around in space will just hit the moon if it's in its path. Now, we know that the mesosphere here on Earth has the ability to break up and burn up things that are trying to enter into Earth's atmosphere, but the moon has no atmosphere, or very little atmosphere, and so whatever's aimed towards it it's going to impact the surface and it causes that big indentation that you see there. So those are called craters. Believe it or not, there are mountains on the moon, and they are called highlands. Now, they're not going to be as big as the mountains we have here on Earth, obviously, but they are higher in elevation, and you have the lower elevations as well. And the last feature we're going to look at, like I said, this is pretty quick and to the point. The last features are called Maria, and the moon, when it was forming, was actually kind of volcanic in that it had running lava moving on it. And so the Maria are dark lava flows that have eventually cooled once the moon cooled and formed. So that's it. Short and sweet. So make sure you have your notes filled out and bring them to class tomorrow.